Picture this: a dimly lit chamber deep beneath a medieval castle, where robed figures gather in hushed secrecy, exchanging symbols known only to a chosen few. These weren't just meetings. They were the hidden gears turning the machinery of power in an age where kingdoms rose and fell on whispers. For centuries, secret societies operated in the shadows, pulling strings that shaped the destiny of empires, yet their stories remain shrouded in mystery. What if I told you that some of history's most pivotal moments, the fall of kings, the rise of revolutions, even the very foundations of modern finance, were influenced by these elusive groups? Today, we're peeling back the layers of time to reveal how secret societies like the Knights Templar and the Rosicrucians didn't just exist on the fringes of history, they were its architects. Think about the medieval world, a tapestry of thrones, faiths, and wars, where power was as fragile as it was coveted. Now imagine a network of individuals, bound by oaths so sacred they'd rather face death than break them, operating beyond the reach of kings and popes. These societies weren't just clubs for the elite. They were engines of influence, weaving their ideals into the fabric of politics, religion, and culture. The Templars, for instance, weren't merely warrior monks. They became the medieval equivalent of a multinational corporation, with a banking system so advanced it funded crusades. And then there were the Rosicrucians, whose blend of science and mysticism challenged the very boundaries of knowledge. But with great power came great peril. The same secrecy that protected them also made them targets, and their downfalls were often as dramatic as their rises. So why does this matter to us today? Because the legacy of these societies isn't confined to dusty manuscripts or conspiracy theories. Their ideas about governance, secrecy, and even resistance echo through the centuries, influencing everything from fraternal orders to modern institutions. This isn't just a tale of the past. It's a lens to understand how power operates in the shadows, then and now. As we journey through their stories, you'll discover how ambition clashed with betrayal, how symbols held life or death meaning, and how the line between myth and history blurs when secrets are involved. By the end, you'll see the medieval world, and perhaps our own, in a whole new light. Ready to step into the shadows? Let's begin. To understand how medieval secret societies came to be, we have to travel even further back to the ancient world, where knowledge wasn't just power, but sacred. Long before castles dotted Europe's landscape, groups like the Druids in Celtic lands and the mystery schools of Greece and Egypt were already mastering the art of secrecy. These weren't just gatherings of scholars. They were guardians of wisdom so potent it had to be shielded from the uninitiated. Picture the mysteries in ancient Greece, where rituals around life, death, and rebirth were whispered only to those deemed worthy. Or the Druids, who refused to write down their teachings, ensuring their knowledge stayed locked in memory and ceremony. This tradition of oral and ritualistic secrecy didn't vanish with the Roman Empire. It evolved, weaving itself into the very fabric of the medieval world. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and you'll find a perfect storm for secret societies to thrive. The church held immense power, but its grip wasn't absolute. Feudal lords clashed constantly, and intellectual curiosity simmered beneath the surface of religious dogma. For those who questioned, who sought knowledge beyond what the church sanctioned, secrecy wasn't just convenient, it was survival. Take the rise of alchemy, for example. On the surface, it was about turning lead into gold, But beneath that lay a deeper quest for spiritual and scientific truth. Alchemists worked in hidden chambers, encoding their discoveries in symbols only fellow initiates could decipher. This wasn't just about hiding from the church. It was about preserving ideas that challenged the very foundations of medieval thought. And then there were the political undercurrents. In a world where bloodlines and divine right dictated power, secret societies offered an alternative, a way to influence kings and popes without wearing a crown. The Cathars, a religious group branded as heretics, formed tight-knit communities in southern France, sharing beliefs that threatened the church's authority. Their secrecy wasn't just ritual, it was resistance. When the church launched the Crusade to crush them, their underground networks proved how dangerous hidden knowledge could be to those in power. This tension, between the desire for truth and the need to conceal it, became the lifeblood of medieval secret societies. They weren't just relics of ancient traditions. They were the product of their time, shaped by faith, fear, and the relentless pursuit of influence. What's fascinating is how these early groups set the blueprint for everything that followed. Their methods, symbols, initiation rites, layers of secrecy, weren't just theatrical. They were practical, designed to protect ideas that could topple empires. When the Knights Templar emerged centuries later, they didn't invent secrecy. They inherited it, refining it into a tool that would bankroll kingdoms. The Rosicrucians didn't spring from nowhere. They stood on the shoulders of alchemists and mystics who'd been working in shadows for generations. The medieval world didn't create secret societies. It gave them a stage, where the stakes were higher, the dangers greater, and the rewards unimaginable. The story of the Knights Templar reads like a medieval thriller, an order of warrior monks who rose from obscurity to become the most powerful institution of their age, only to crash down in flames. It all began in the year 1119, when 9 French knights took vows of poverty and chastity, pledging to protect pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. On the surface, their mission was simple: defend the faithful in a holy land torn by war. But within decades, these humble guardians transformed into something far more complex, a hybrid of holy order and financial empire that rewrote the rules of medieval power. What set the Templars apart wasn't just their military prowess, though that was formidable. It was their genius for innovation. Recognizing the dangers pilgrims faced carrying wealth across bandit-ridden roads, they created a system of letters of credit, an early form of banking. A traveler could deposit funds at one Templar and withdraw them at another, protected by the Order's network of fortresses stretching from Paris to Jerusalem. Suddenly, the Templars weren't just protectors of people. They were guardians of treasure, trusted by kings and merchants alike. Their vaults became so secure that even monarchs used them to store royal coffers. But with wealth came influence, and with influence came enemies. The Templars answered only to the Pope, exempt from local laws and taxes, a privilege that grated on secular rulers. Their initiation rites, conducted in secrecy, fueled wild rumors. Whispers spread of forbidden rituals and hidden relics, from the Holy Grail to fragments of the true cross. Whether these stories held truth or were fabrications of their rivals, they painted a target on the Order's iconic white mantles. The turning point came in the early 14th century, when King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the Templars, saw an opportunity. On Friday, October 13, 1307, he ordered a mass arrest of Templars across his kingdom, charging them with heresy, blasphemy, and corruption. Under torture, many confessed to outrageous crimes, though historians still debate whether these admissions were coerced. The Pope, initially resistant, eventually disbanded the order under pressure, and its last Grand Master was burned at the stake. Legend says he cursed the king and pope from the flames. What's striking is just their fall, but how quickly it happened. An organization that had built castles, funded wars, and served as the medieval equivalent of an international bank collapsed almost overnight. Their demise wasn't just about religion or even greed. It was a warning about what happened when a secret society grew too powerful in a world where kings and popes brooked no rivals. Yet their legacy endured. From their banking systems to their architectural innovations, the Templars left fingerprints on history that outlasted their persecution. Even today, their name conjures images of hidden knowledge and untold power, proof that in the medieval world, the line between protector and power broker was often written in shadows. While the Knights Templar harnessed secrecy to build power, the Cathars used it to survive. In the sun-drenched hills of southern France, this sect flourished in the 12th and 13th centuries, preaching a faith so radical it threatened to unravel the Church's grip on medieval Europe. Unlike the Templars, who wore their influence proudly, the Cathars operated in whispers. Their beliefs passed hand to hand like forbidden treasure. They rejected the Church's authority outright, seeing the material world as the creation of an evil force, a stark contrast to the Catholic doctrine of a benevolent God. This wasn't just heresy, it was a spiritual revolution, and it spread like wildfire through towns and castles, where local lords often turned a blind eye, valuing regional independence over papal decrees. What made the Cathars so dangerous wasn't just their theology, it was their structure. They organized themselves into enlightened leaders who lived austere lives, and credence, everyday followers who kept their faith hidden. Unlike the Church's towering cathedrals, Cathar rituals took place in homes, forests, or caves, their ceremonies stripped of the pomp that defined medieval Catholicism. When challenged, they could vanish into the populace, protected by networks of sympathizers. To the Church, this wasn't just disobedience. It was a shadow kingdom operating in plain sight, and that made it unforgivable. Enter Pope Innocent III, a man who saw heresy not just as a sin, but as a threat to the very order of Christendom. In 1208, he launched the Crusade, named after the Cathar stronghold of Albi. But this was no ordinary holy war. While crusaders in the Holy Land fought foreign infidels, here Christian knights slaughtered Christian communities, burning towns like to the ground. The infamous cry, "Kill them all, God will know his own," may be legend, but it captures the Crusade's ruthless logic. Eradicate the heresy, even if it meant erasing entire cities. Yet beneath the religious fervor lurked a raw struggle for power. The Counts of Toulouse and other southern nobles had long resisted Paris's influence, and the Cathars became a convenient excuse to crush regional autonomy. When the smoke cleared, this distinct culture lay in ruins, its lords dispossessed, and the French crown's authority stretched further than ever. The Cathars themselves were hunted to extinction, they're burned at the stake, their texts destroyed. But their story reveals a chilling truth. In the medieval world, secret societies didn't just risk persecution, they could become the spark for wars that reshaped maps. The Cathars' legacy is a paradox. They left no grand castles or vaults of gold, yet their downfall reshaped Europe's political landscape. Their belief that the material world was corrupt ironically led to one of history's most brutal material conflicts. And while their faith vanished, their resistance echoes in later movements that dared to challenge power from the shadows. In the end, the Crusade wasn't just about wiping out a heresy. It was about proving who controlled the narrative of truth itself. High in the rugged mountains of Persia, a different kind of secret society carved its name into history, not with gold or grand philosophies, but with the chilling precision of a dagger's edge. Though a name that would morph into the word assassin in European tongues didn't just operate in shadows, they weaponized fear itself. While the Templars built banks and the Cathars sought spiritual purity, these masters of intrigue turned terror into an art form, proving that in the medieval world, sometimes the deadliest power wasn't an army, but a whisper. Their strongholds, perched like eagles' nests on sheer cliffs, were more than just fortresses. They were stages for psychological theater. Imagine a crusader king waking to find a dagger pinned to his pillow with a note, or a rival emir discovering his most trusted guard had been a sleeper agent for years. These weren't just killings. They were calculated performances designed to paralyze enemies with dread. Unlike European societies that hid their rituals, they wanted their victims, and the world, to know exactly who held the knife. Their reputation became their shield, allowing them to punch far above their weight in a region torn between crusader armies and warring Muslim dynasties. At the heart of their strategy lay a brutal pragmatism. While other groups used secrecy to protect knowledge, they used it to amplify uncertainty. They understood that a single well-timed murder could do more than 1,000 soldiers to shift the balance of power. Take the infamous assassination of King of Jerusalem, in 1192. In broad daylight, two disguised infiltrated his retinue and struck him down, sending shockwaves through the Crusader states. The message was clear. No one, no matter how well guarded, was beyond their reach. Yet there's a grim irony to their story. While their tactics were ruthless, their goals often aligned with survival rather than conquest. Founded by a charismatic leader who seized the impregnable castle, they were a sect within the Ismaili branch of Islam, persecuted by both Sunni caliphates and invading crusaders. In a world where their annihilation seemed inevitable, they turned their weakness into strength, using fear to carve out pockets of autonomy where they could practice their faith. Their infamous Paradise Gardens, where recruits were allegedly drugged and shown visions of heaven to ensure loyalty, might be more legend than fact. But the myth itself speaks volumes about their understanding of human psychology. What makes the truly fascinating isn't just their brutality, but their legacy in the ethics of power. They forced rulers to confront an uncomfortable question. Is it worse to face an enemy you can see, or one who might be hiding in plain sight? Their methods blurred the line between warrior and spy, between holy mission and cold-blooded pragmatism. Even Saladin, the legendary Muslim commander who crushed Crusader armies, chose to negotiate with them rather than risk their knives. Proof that in the medieval world, influence didn't always wear a crown. By the time the Mongols raised in 1256, they had already cemented their place in history as the ultimate practitioners of asymmetric warfare. Their downfall came not from betrayal or lost secrets, but from an unstoppable force that respected no shadows. Yet their tactics, targeted strikes, psychological dominance, the of reputation, would echo through centuries, leaving us to ponder where the line falls between terror and strategy, and how much darkness power tolerates in its pursuit. While knights and assassins wielded swords and daggers, another secret society shaped history with something far more subversive: ink. Enter the Rosicrucians, a name wrapped in mystery even today. Unlike the Templars with their castles or with their blades, their power lay in ideas so potent they sparked intellectual revolutions without ever proving the group truly existed. Their story begins not with a battle cry, but with 3 cryptic texts published in early 17th century Germany, the Rosicrucian manifestos. These weren't just pamphlets, they were literary grenades lobbed into the heart of Europe's intellectual elite. The first manifesto, read like a detective story mixed with a scientific journal. It told of a mythical founder, Christian, who allegedly traveled to the East, absorbing ancient wisdom before returning to establish a secret brotherhood dedicated to healing the sick for free and ushering in a new age of enlightenment. At a time when medicine was a luxury for the wealthy and the church controlled access to knowledge, this was radical stuff. The manifestos promised a world where science and spirituality intertwined, where alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold, but about transforming society itself. What made the Rosicrucians unique wasn't just their vision, but their method. They never revealed membership roles or meeting places. Instead, they let their ideas spread like wildfire through salons and universities, forcing readers to ask, were these texts fiction, hoax, or the tip of a vast underground network? The ambiguity was deliberate. By never confirming or denying their existence, they became a mirror for the hopes and fears of an era on the brink of the scientific revolution. Figures like Descartes and wrestled with their ideas, while paranoid clergy accused them of everything from heresy to conspiring with the devil. The Rosicrucian legacy lies in their paradox. They may have been more myth than men, yet their influence was undeniably real. Their call for open knowledge inspired early scientific societies, including the Royal Society in London. Their blend of mysticism and reason prefigured the Enlightenment's balancing act between faith and empiricism. Even their critics couldn't escape their shadow. When the Catholic Church condemned their dangerous ideas, they inadvertently amplified them. Perhaps their greatest trick was proving that a secret society doesn't need members to change the world, just the right idea at the right time. In an age where printing presses were the new weapons, the Rosicrucians mastered the art of intellectual guerrilla warfare, leaving us to wonder, does it matter if they were real when their fingerprints are etched so deeply into history beneath the bustling markets and soaring cathedrals of medieval Europe? Another kind of power structure thrived, one built not on swords or sacred relics, but on trade secrets guarded like state secrets. Guilds, those seemingly respectable associations of craftsmen and merchants, were far more than early versions of modern unions. They were economic fortresses, controlling who could practice a trade, how goods were made, and even the prices charged, all under the veil of rituals and oaths that would feel right at home in any secret society. Take the stonemasons, for example. Their ability to shape stone into gravity-defying cathedrals wasn't just skill, It was carefully protected knowledge, passed down through initiation rites that bound apprentices to silence. A mason who revealed the secrets of load-bearing arches or mortar mixtures didn't just risk expulsion. He risked his livelihood, or worse. What made guilds so formidable was their dual nature. On the surface, they were pillars of medieval society, endorsed by kings and bishops alike. But behind closed doors, they operated like cartels, using strict hierarchies and coded language to maintain control. The wool guilds of Florence didn't just sell cloth, they dictated the entire supply chain, from English sheep farms to Flemish weavers, ensuring no outsider could undercut their profits. Their meetings, often held in candlelit halls after dark, featured ceremonies where members swore oaths on relics, blurring the line between business and brotherhood. To cross a guild wasn't just bad for business, it was a betrayal of a sacred trust. Yet guilds weren't merely about stifling competition. They were incubators of innovation, albeit selectively. The alchemists' guilds, for instance, walked a razor's edge between science and heresy. While their public work might involve crafting dyes or medicines, their private experiments with metals and chemicals pushed the boundaries of what was known. When a guild alchemist discovered a new glaze for pottery or a method for purifying metals, that knowledge was hoarded like treasure, shared only with initiates who'd proven their loyalty. This wasn't just greed, it was survival. In an era without patents, secrecy was the only way to protect years of costly research from rivals. The darker side of this system, though, was its exclusivity. Guilds maintained their power by keeping trades hereditary, often barring women, foreigners, or the poor from joining. The glassmakers of Venice, renowned for their crystalline mirrors, were so paranoid about leaks that their artisans were effectively imprisoned on the island of a gilded cage where skill and suspicion went hand in hand. Even within guilds, knowledge was compartmentalized. A master might teach an apprentice only enough to complete his tasks, reserving the true secrets for his bloodline. This created a shadow economy where the best techniques were never written down, only demonstrated in whispers. By the late Middle Ages, guilds had become so entrenched that they sparked their own backlash. Monarchs grew weary of their price fixing, and upstart merchants chafed at their monopolies. The rise of printing, ironically, began to undermine their control. Once craft techniques could be published in books, the guild's stranglehold on knowledge started to slip. But their legacy endures in modern professions, from medical associations to tech unions, proving that the tension between sharing progress and protecting advantage is as old as commerce itself. The guilds may not have worn hoods or daggers, but in their own way, they mastered the art of power through secrecy, one locked workshop at a time. History often paints the medieval world as a stage dominated by men, knights, kings, and monks. But behind the scenes, women carved their own paths through the shadows of secret societies. Take the Beguines, a fascinating hybrid of religious order and underground network that flourished in Northern Europe from the 12th century onward. These women weren't nuns bound by cloisters, nor were they ordinary townsfolk. They lived in communal households called, taking temporary vows of chastity and poverty while remaining free to leave and marry. To the church, they were a puzzle too pious to condemn, too independent to control. Their semi-secret status allowed them to operate schools, care for the sick, and even engage in textile trades, creating an economic and spiritual web entirely outside male oversight. When bishops grew suspicious of their unorthodox practices, like reading scripture in the vernacular, the Beguines adapted, using coded language and quiet alliances to protect their way of life. Their story isn't just about resistance. It's in how women turned marginalization into a source of power. Then there's the tantalizing mystery of female Templars. Official records insist the order admitted only men, but whispers persist of women donning the iconic white mantle. Chronicles mention Templar sisters in commanderies across France and Spain, while trial documents from the order's suppression reference, who stood accused alongside their brothers. Were these women warriors, healers, or administrators? The truth may lie in the gaps between dogma and practice. In Aragon, for example, the order of a Templar successor openly listed female members as late as the 14th century. Even if their roles were limited, their presence hints at a flexibility the order never publicly acknowledged. For a society obsessed with secrecy, perhaps the greatest concealment was the quiet agency of women within its ranks. But the most striking examples emerge from the alchemical underground. While guilds barred women from formal apprenticeships, manuscripts reveal female alchemists like Maria the Jewess, a legendary figure credited with inventing distillation equipment still used today. In workshops and private courts, like Isabella collected forbidden texts, while middle-class wives traded herbal remedies with coded recipes that doubled as ciphers. These weren't just hobbies. They were acts of defiance in a world that women accessed to universities. When the church condemned alchemy as demonic, women's involvement added another layer of danger. Yet their contributions to medicine and chemistry seeped into mainstream science through back channels. What unites these stories isn't just secrecy, but strategy. In a patriarchal system, women's power often relied on ambiguity, being seen as too harmless to notice or too pious to challenge. The Beguines leveraged their reputation for holiness to shield their independence. Female alchemists worked under the guise of domestic craft. Even rumored Templar sisters may have thrived precisely because their existence seemed implausible. Their legacies remind us that influence isn't always about titles or visible authority. Sometimes, it's about bending the rules without breaking them, leaving traces so faint they force us to question what we think we know about the past. The deeper we dig, the clearer it becomes. Medieval secret societies weren't just boys' clubs with daggers and passwords. They were ecosystems where women found cracks in the system and widened them into doorways, proving that even in the darkest ages, power could wear a woman's face if you knew where to look. Walking through a medieval cathedral, you might admire the soaring arches or stained glass without realizing you're standing in a gallery of hidden messages. Secret societies didn't just rely on whispered oaths. They embedded their beliefs in plain sight, using symbols as both shield and sword. Take the Templar cross, its arms widening like blades. To outsiders, it was mere decoration. To initiates, it signaled everything from meeting places to levels of rank, its variations encoding secrets within secrets. Even the simple act of carving it into a church wall served dual purposes, honoring their faith while marking territory like a spiritual claim stake. But symbols weren't just identifiers, they were survival tools. Alchemists faced persecution if their work was deemed heretical, so they developed an entire visual lexicon to conceal their experiments. A serpent swallowing its tail wasn't just an odd doodle, it represented symbolizing eternal cycles and the philosopher's stone's quest. The green lion devouring the sun sounded like madness to the uninitiated, but to adepts, it described dissolving gold with aqua. These weren't arbitrary codes. They were lifelines, allowing knowledge to pass between generations under the nose of authorities who'd burned their manuscripts. Architecture became the ultimate canvas for this covert language. Rosicrucian influences ripple through Gothic cathedrals like Chartres, where labyrinth floor patterns mirrored spiritual journeys and column carvings hid astrological alignments. Builders, often guild members sworn to secrecy, encoded mathematical truths in proportions, hiding sacred geometry in plain sight. Even colors carried meaning. The vibrant blue in medieval manuscripts, derived from crushed lapis lazuli, wasn't just lavish. It signaled divine wisdom, a visual cue to those who understood its worth. The genius of these systems lay in their deniability. A nobleman's ring bearing a tiny owl might seem decorative, but to a fellow initiate, it announced membership in a society valuing wisdom over wealth. Plants in monastic herb gardens were arranged not just for harvest, but as living sigils: rosemary for remembrance among memory cults, mandrake roots shaped like humans hinting at esoteric anatomy studies. When the church cracked down on certain groups, their symbols often escaped destruction by being too mundane to notice or too holy to destroy. Today, these coded legacies surround us. Heraldic crests inherit medieval symbols' layered meanings, while pharmacy caduceus staffs trace back to alchemical emblems. Modern fraternal orders still use variations of these visual languages, proving that the most enduring power isn't in swords or vaults, but in the ability to say everything without uttering a word. The next time you pass an old building or study a medieval painting, look closer. What appears as artistry might just be a centuries-old conversation waiting to be decoded. At the height of its power, the medieval church faced an existential dilemma: how to root out secret societies without exposing its own complicity in their networks. On one hand, bishops thundered from pulpits against the dangers of hidden knowledge, condemning groups like the Cathars as threats to salvation itself. Yet behind cathedral walls, manuscripts penned by clandestine orders circulated among high-ranking clergy, and some of the most ardent persecutors were rumored to wear secret symbols beneath their vestments. This wasn't just hypocrisy. It was a reflection of the Church's fragile grip on a world where spiritual authority and political power were constantly being negotiated. Consider the case of the Inquisition, ostensibly created to stamp out heresy. While inquisitors tortured peasants for possessing forbidden texts, certain cardinals quietly collected the same manuscripts, locking them away in private libraries labeled forbidden, yet meticulously preserved. The infamous trial of the Knights Templar laid this contradiction bare. Pope Clement V initially defended the order, only to abandon them when King Philip IV of France turned public opinion against them with lurid accusations. What looked like a holy crusade against secrecy was often a power struggle masked in theological terms, where the definition of heresy could shift overnight based on who held the upper hand. Even more telling were the underground networks operating within the church itself. Mystical brotherhoods like the Friends of God, active in 14th century Germany, counted priests and nuns among their members, blending orthodox piety with radical ideas about direct spiritual experience. Their writings circulated through monastic channels, protected by coded language that mirrored the very heresies the Church publicly condemned. When the Beguines, semi-cloistered women who preached in the vernacular, were accused of heresy, some found unlikely protectors in local bishops who valued their charitable work too much to enforce Rome's decrees. This tension between doctrine and practice wasn't just about control. It reflected a deeper anxiety about who had the right to interpret divine truth. The Church's monopoly on salvation relied on the idea that grace could only flow through its sacraments, yet secret societies offered alternative paths, whether through the Templars, alleged relics, the Cathars, dualist cosmology, or the Rosicrucians, fusion of science and mysticism. Every crackdown exposed the irony at the heart of medieval Christianity. The more violently the Church sought to erase dissent, the more it revealed how porous the boundaries of orthodoxy really were. Perhaps the ultimate testament to this struggle lies in the artifacts that survived. In the Vatican's own archives, researchers have uncovered grimoires and alchemical texts bearing marginal notes in clerical hands, proof that even as public edicts condemned hidden knowledge, curiosity persisted behind closed doors. The medieval Church's war on secrecy wasn't a battle it could ever truly win, because in the end, the hunger for mystery and the desire to explore beyond sanctioned boundaries proved as old as faith itself. And that's a lesson that echoes far beyond the Middle Ages. The Templars' demise didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of decades of quiet resentment simmering beneath the surface of medieval politics. King Philip IV of France, nicknamed the Fair for his golden locks rather than his ethics, had borrowed staggering sums from the order to fund his wars and lavish court. By 1307, his debt had grown so enormous that repaying it would have bankrupted the crown. But the Templars weren't just creditors. They were a state within a state, with their own armies, fleets, and a direct line to the Pope that bypassed royal authority entirely. For a monarch obsessed with centralizing power, their existence had become intolerable. What followed was an in-political theater disguised as piety. On Friday, October 13th, a date that would forever stain the calendar with superstition, Philip's agents fanned out across France at dawn, arresting hundreds of Templars simultaneously. The charges read like a medieval smear campaign: heresy, blasphemy, sodomy, even worshipping a mysterious idol called. Under torture, many knights confessed to outrageous acts, though their testimonies were riddled with contradictions. Some described kissing their superior on the base of the spine during initiation rites, while others spoke of trampling crosses, rituals historians now believe may have been twisted versions of loyalty tests or misunderstood symbolism. The real shock wasn't the accusations, but how quickly the order unraveled. These were the same warriors who'd held Muslim armies at bay for generations, whose financial network spanned continents. Yet within weeks, their once untouchable reputation lay in tatters. Philip's genius lay in his timing. He struck during a vulnerable leadership transition and exploited growing public distrust of the order's wealth and secrecy. By the time Pope Clement V, initially skeptical of the charges, realized the extent of Philip's scheming, public opinion had turned irrevocably against the Templars. Their final act was as dramatic as their rise. The last Grand Master recanted his forced confession as flames consumed him in 1314, allegedly cursing Philip and Clement to meet him before God within a year. Whether by coincidence or poetic justice, both men were dead within months. The order's vast assets were officially transferred to though historians suspect French coffers absorbed much of the wealth. This wasn't just the fall of a powerful group. It was a watershed moment in how societies balance secrecy and influence. The Templars made two fatal miscalculations. They assumed their holy mission made them invulnerable, and they failed to recognize when their mystique had curdled into suspicion. Their legacy teaches us that even the mightiest shadows can be dispelled when rulers decide the light of their authority is brighter. When the Black Death swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, it didn't just decimate populations, it shattered trust. As bodies piled up in streets and priests died alongside their flocks, people began questioning why God would permit such suffering. Traditional institutions, from the church to royal courts, offered no answers, no cures, only faltering promises. Into this vacuum of despair stepped secret societies, their allure by desperation. Among the most striking were the flagellants, bands of penitents who traveled from town to town, whipping their own flesh raw in public spectacles of atonement. At first glance, they appeared as pious devotees seeking divine mercy. But beneath the blood and chants lay something darker, a radical rejection of ecclesiastical authority, a belief that salvation could only be earned through their brutal rituals, not the sacraments of a failing church. What made these groups so dangerous wasn't just their extremism, but their organization. The flagellants operated with military precision, their processions timed to coincide with market days for maximum visibility. New members underwent initiation rites, swearing oaths of secrecy and obedience to self-proclaimed masters. Local clergy watched helplessly as entire villages abandoned Mass to join these wandering zealots, their influence spreading like the plague itself. When Pope Clement VI finally condemned them in 1349, it wasn't just due to their violence. It was because they'd become a shadow church, one that answered to no pope. Yet the flagellants were merely the most visible symptom of a deeper shift. As the death toll climbed, so did suspicion. Secret societies promising immunity through coded charms or herbal remedies flourished in back alleys. Apothecaries whispered of plague shields amulets containing everything from crushed emeralds to venomous toad ash, while underground alchemists peddled dubious elixirs to nobles and peasants alike. In cities like Florence, where half the population perished, rumors swirled of midnight gatherings where the wealthy paid to have their homes marked with invisible symbols, allegedly sparing them from infection. Whether these marks were blessings, curses, or mere superstition, they spoke to a terrifying truth. When faced with annihilation, people would turn to anyone who claimed to hold the key to survival. The plague's aftermath revealed an even more unsettling pattern. As societies rebuilt, many of these clandestine groups didn't disband, they evolved. Former flagellants resurfaced as millenarian cults, predicting the end of days. Apothecary networks became the backbone of early guilds, their once secret formulas now commodities. The chaos had proven something revolutionary. That crisis could dissolve old loyalties faster than any army, creating fertile ground for new power structures to take root. By the time the dust settled, Europe had learned a bitter lesson. That fear, when harnessed by those who understood its alchemy, could be as transformative as any plague. And that lesson would echo through every rebellion, witch hunt, and revolution to come. By the 15th century, the rigid certainties of the medieval world were crumbling like the walls of its abandoned castles. The plague had hollowed out old hierarchies, the church's authority was fracturing under corruption scandals, and a new hunger for knowledge crackled through Europe like lightning. Secret societies, once guardians of forbidden faiths or wielders of political daggers, found themselves at a crossroads, adapt or fade into obsolescence. What emerged from this ferment wasn't the end of secrecy, but its reinvention. Groups like the Freemasons, descended from stonemason guilds, began shifting their focus from building cathedrals to constructing a new worldview, one where geometry and philosophy intertwined, where the tools of the Mason became metaphors for shaping society itself. The alchemists' workshops tell this story best. In hushed laboratories, the quest to turn lead into gold gradually gave way to something more revolutionary. The realization that transformation wasn't just about metals, but minds. Figures like Paracelsus, once persecuted for their unorthodox ideas, now found patrons among Renaissance princes hungry for innovation. The same symbols that had hidden heresy now concealed early scientific discoveries. A rose might represent Christ's wounds to a monk, but to an initiate, it could diagram the circulatory system. This duality allowed radical ideas to spread under the guise of tradition, protecting thinkers from the lingering threat of Inquisition fires. Nowhere was this transition more striking than in Florence, where the Medici family, bankers by trade, puppeteers by instinct, cultivated secret circles of artists, philosophers, and mathematicians. In their private villas, Neoplatonic scholars debated ideas that would have been branded heresy a century earlier, all under the protective cloak of Medici influence. Primavera, with its veiled pagan symbolism, wasn't just art. It was a visual manifesto for this new era, where ancient wisdom and Christian doctrine danced together in carefully calculated harmony. The message was clear. Secrecy was no longer just about survival. It had become a tool for cultural alchemy. The real legacy of this shift lies in how it redefined power itself. Where medieval societies had traded in relics and blood oaths, Renaissance groups trafficked in something more dangerous: ideas. The Rosicrucian manifestos, circulating like intellectual contraband in the early 17th century, didn't just promise hidden knowledge. They envisioned a utopia where science and spirituality coexisted. Even the language of secrecy evolved. Ciphers once used to protect alchemical recipes now encrypted political missives, like the intricate codes employed by Elizabeth I's spy network. The game hadn't changed, only the playing field. By the time the Enlightenment dawned, these adapted secret societies had laid the groundwork for a modern world that revered reason, but still whispered in corners. The Freemasons' lodges became laboratories for democratic ideals, their rituals preserving the old forms while filling them with new meaning. The transition was complete. What began as a means of resisting authority had become a way to reshape it from within. The shadows hadn't disappeared. they'd simply learned to reflect a different light. The legend of the Illuminati burns brighter in modern conspiracy theories than it ever did in historical reality. Yet its flickering origins reach back to medieval Europe's shadowy corners. Most don't realize that this infamous name, now synonymous with puppet master elites, began as an offshoot of much older secret traditions. The real Illuminati, founded in Bavaria in 1776, borrowed heavily from medieval esoteric groups, Rosicrucian mysticism, Templar-inspired rites, even the coded languages of alchemists. But here's the twist. While pop culture paints them as omnipotent schemers, the historical truth is far more revealing. They weren't pulling global strings. They were intellectuals using secrecy as a shield against authoritarian crackdowns, much like their medieval predecessors who hid heresy behind stained glass and stone carvings. What makes the Illuminati myth so persistent isn't just its drama, but how perfectly it mirrors medieval anxieties about invisible power. Consider the Knights Templar's fall. Their sudden destruction birthed centuries of speculation about surviving members plotting revenge, much like modern tales of Illuminati bankrolling revolutions. The same fears that once made peasants whisper about witches, covens now fuel YouTube videos about celebrity rituals. This isn't coincidence. It's human nature to distrust complexity, to simplify history's messy power struggles into tidy narratives of good versus evil, with shadowy figures pulling levers behind the curtain. Dig deeper, and you'll find the Illuminati's supposed symbols. The all-seeing eye, the pyramid, aren't modern inventions but medieval holdovers. The Eye of Providence first appeared in religious art as a symbol of God's omniscience, while pyramid imagery echoed alchemical diagrams representing Enlightenment's hierarchical path. Even their alleged control of finance mirrors medieval guilds' monopolies, except where guilds kept trade secrets to protect livelihoods. The Illuminati myth imagines knowledge hoarded for domination. Perhaps the greatest irony is how these myths overshadow the real medieval societies that did shape history. The Templars moved armies and gold. The Cathars sparked crusades. The toppled kings. Their stories are far more extraordinary than any fictionalized Illuminati cabal, because they reveal how actual power operates, not through flawless conspiracies, but through human alliances as fragile as they are ambitious. The next time you see an Illuminati confirmed meme, remember, it's not history's hidden masters we should fear, but our own hunger to believe in them. Alchemy wasn't just about bubbling flasks and cryptic symbols. It was a medieval revolution disguised as mysticism. Behind locked doors in dimly lit workshops, alchemists pursued a quest far grander than turning base metals into gold. They believed nature held secrets waiting to be decoded, truths that could heal the sick, extend life, and even transform society itself. To modern eyes, their manuscripts look like fantastical puzzles, filled with dragons swallowing their tails and kings dissolving in baths of acid. But these weren't mere superstitions. They were sophisticated metaphors for chemical processes and spiritual journeys. An alchemist's crucible wasn't just a tool. It was a mirror reflecting their conviction that matter and spirit were inseparable, that changing one could change the other. Take the legendary Emerald Tablet, a text attributed to the mythical Hermes. Its cryptic maxim, as above, so below, wasn't just poetic nonsense. It suggested a universe where the microcosm of human experience mirrored the macrocosm of the cosmos, where understanding the properties of mercury or sulfur might unlock divine truths. This idea electrified medieval thinkers, from Arab scholars who pioneered experimental methods, to European adepts who secretly taught alchemy to his most promising students. Their work laid foundations for modern chemistry, but their real influence ran deeper. By framing science as a sacred pursuit, they carved out intellectual space in an era where questioning nature could be heresy. The political power of alchemy often goes overlooked. Kings and popes didn't just tolerate these secretive scholars, they funded them. Why? Because alchemy promised more than gold, it offered control. A ruler who mastered the philosopher's stone wouldn't just fill his treasury, he'd wield the ultimate symbol of transformation, proof that divine favor rested on his reign. Holy Roman Emperor II turned Prague into a haven for alchemists, hoping their arts would bolster his shaky claim to power. Even Elizabeth I employed John Dee, an alchemist who doubled as her spy, using his network of European contacts to gather intelligence under the guise of scholarly correspondence. But the most fascinating alchemists weren't the ones at court, they were the outsiders working in the margins. Women often erased from history, managed laboratories while their husbands took public credit. Jewish alchemists in Spain and Portugal developed distillation techniques that crossed religious boundaries, even as persecution swirled around them. Their surviving manuscripts reveal ingenious codes, recipes written backward, key steps hidden in religious psalms, or crucial ingredients referred to only by astrological signs. This wasn't paranoia, it was necessity. When the Church condemned alchemy as demonic in 1314, these protections meant knowledge could survive flames and purges. By the Renaissance, alchemy's legacy split like mercury droplets. Some strands hardened into modern science. Paracelsus's alchemical medicines evolved into pharmacology, and the meticulous record-keeping of guild alchemists paved the way for the scientific method. Other strands wove into the mystical tapestries of Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry, where the language of metals became metaphors for moral refinement. What began as a quest to perfect matter ended up perfecting ideas, proving that the true philosopher's stone was never a physical object. It was the enduring belief that hidden knowledge could remake the world. And in that sense, the alchemists succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Walk into any modern Freemason lodge, and you'll catch echoes of medieval stonemason guilds in the ritual tools, the aprons, even the coded handshakes. But the connection runs deeper than ceremony. It's a direct lineage of secrecy as a vessel for ideals. When those guilds transformed into speculative masonry in the 18th century, they didn't just preserve old traditions, they repurposed them. The compass and square, once literal tools for building cathedrals, became metaphors for constructing moral character. This wasn't mere nostalgia. It was proof that medieval secret societies had cracked a timeless code. Wrap ideas in mystery, and they outlive empires. The Rosicrucian manifestos of the 17th century sparked a similar evolution. Their blend of science and spirituality, lifted straight from alchemists' notebooks, now fuels everything from New Age movements to Silicon Valley techno-utopianism. Silicon Valley's obsession with disruption mirrors the Rosicrucian dream of societal transformation. Only instead of hidden manuscripts, today's initiates share encrypted PDFs. Even the Templars' banking innovations live on in cryptocurrency circles, where phrases like trustless transactions would make those medieval bankers nod in recognition. The symbols shift, but the pattern holds. Secret societies don't vanish, they migrate. Yet perhaps the most telling legacy lies in our collective imagination. Medieval conspiracy theories about Templars hoarding the Holy Grail have modern counterparts in QAnon's deep state narratives, or Elon Musk joking about joining the Illuminati. The players change, popes and kings become celebrities and politicians, but the human craving to believe in shadowy puppet masters remains unchanged. Social media algorithms now amplify what once spread through whispered rumors in taverns, proving that the mechanics of suspicion haven't evolved as much as we'd like to think. But here's the irony. The groups that actually shaped history, like the Cathars, or rarely match their mythical counterparts. The real Templars were accountants with swords, not guardians of esoteric relics. The true power of medieval secret societies wasn't in their mystique, but in their ability to adapt, to turn persecution into prestige, to recast suppression as martyrdom. That's the lesson for our age of misinformation. The stories we tell about hidden powers often reveal more about our own fears than any actual conspiracy. The medieval shadows linger not because they control us, but because we still can't resist peering into the dark. The democratic revolutions of the 18th century claimed to banish secrecy from governance forever. Yet the ghosts of medieval power structures lingered in the foundations of modern states. When Enlightenment thinkers drafted constitutions celebrating transparency, they were directly rejecting centuries of clandestine rule by kings advised behind closed doors, by councils whispering in palace anterooms, by guilds and orders operating beyond public scrutiny. But here's the paradox. These same revolutionaries often relied on secret networks to overthrow monarchies, from Freemason lodges hosting radical debates to underground printers distributing banned pamphlets. The American founding fathers, many of them Masons, enshrined open elections while retaining coded rituals, proof that even the architects of democracy understood some wheels must turn unseen. This tension between ideals and practicalities traces straight back to medieval conflicts. The Magna of 1215, often hailed as democracy's precursor, wasn't crafted in sunlight, but through back-channel deals between King John and rebellious barons, some of whom were Templar sympathizers. Later parliamentary systems grew from royal councils, where real decisions happened in private conversations before ceremonial public votes, much like guild masters deciding trade policies before announcing them to apprentices. What we now call executive privilege, or classified intelligence, has roots in the medieval belief that certain knowledge, if widely known, could destabilize society. Even the word cabal, meaning a secret political clique, originates from the cabal ministry of Charles II's reign, itself echoing much older traditions of closed-door governance. Yet democracies didn't just reject medieval secrecy, they repurposed its tools. Consider voting by secret ballot, now a cornerstone of free elections. Its ancestor, the anonymous voting systems used by Venetian oligarchs and papal conclaves to prevent retaliation. Modern protections mirror the sanctuary once offered by guilds to members exposing corruption. Even investigative journalism inherits techniques from medieval scribes who circulated samizdat manuscripts criticizing corrupt bishops. Texts passed hand to hand because publishing them meant execution. The difference lies not in the methods, but their purpose. Medieval secrecy protected power, while democratic secrecy ideally protects the powerless. The unresolved dilemma surfaces whenever transparency clashes with security. National archives still withhold medieval-style, privileged documents centuries old, while modern governments debate how much surveillance is needed to prevent threats, echoing the Templars' argument that their banking secrecy protected pilgrims. Silicon Valley's algorithmic decision-making often operates as opaquely as any alchemist's workshop, sparking debates about whether 21st century trade secrets have become the new heresies. Even the dark web's encrypted networks recall the Cathars, underground communications, proving that whenever authority claims absolute visibility, counterforces will always carve out shadows. Perhaps the most enduring medieval lesson is that no society can function without some degree of secrecy. Only the honest admit it. The democratic ideal of total transparency remains just that, an ideal forever balanced against the messy reality that some decisions require discretion. Some protections demand silence. What's changed isn't the existence of hidden mechanisms, but our ability to question them. Where medieval peasants might cross themselves at rumors of Templar conspiracies, modern citizens file Freedom of Information requests. That shift, from blind fear to accountable inquiry, is the real inheritance of those candlelit chambers where secret societies once shaped the world. Their greatest legacy wasn't the shadows they cast, but the light we learned to demand. There's something irresistible about a secret, the way it prickles at the back of your mind, the way it makes you lean in closer when someone lowers their voice. Medieval secret societies understood this pull instinctively, crafting their rituals and hierarchies to amplify that tantalizing sense of exclusivity. But this isn't just about medieval history. It's about a quirk of human psychology that transcends time. Our brains are wired to prize what's hidden, a trait that helped our ancestors survive. In the wild, knowing where the clean water flowed or which plants were poisonous before others meant the difference between life and death. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and that same instinct drove peasants and nobles alike to seek out clandestine groups offering forbidden knowledge. Whether it was the Templars, rumored relics, or the alchemists' promises of transformation. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when we encounter a mystery, our brains release dopamine, the same chemical associated with pleasure and motivation. It's why we binge mystery novels or lose hours to rabbit holes about lost civilizations. Medieval secret societies were masters at exploiting this biological trigger. Their initiation rites, whispered oaths, blindfolded journeys, cryptic symbols, weren't just theater. They were psychological hooks designed to make members feel like they'd crossed a threshold into a world of elite understanding. The Rosicrucians didn't just share ideas. They wrapped them in layers of puzzles, knowing the act of decoding would bind their followers more tightly than any oath. Yet secrecy isn't just about pleasure, it's about power. In a world where the church and crown controlled nearly every aspect of life, belonging to a hidden group gave people agency. For the Cathar, secrecy was defiance. For the guild artisan, it was economic survival. Even today, we see echoes of this in everything from exclusive clubs to viral conspiracy theories. The medieval Templars' banking system thrived because clients trusted their discretion, just as modern Swiss banks do. The difference? Today's secrets travel at the speed of a click, but the human craving to know what others don't hasn't changed. What's most revealing is how these societies weaponized curiosity to protect themselves. The Templars' refusal to disclose their rituals didn't just guard their practices. It made them more alluring, ensuring that even their persecutors couldn't resist speculating about what really happened in their chapter houses. They took it further, turning their assassinations into public spectacles that whispered a warning: "We know more than you." This dance between concealment and revelation is a survival tactic as old as storytelling itself. So why do we still chase these shadows centuries later? Because secrets don't just hide truths, they create meaning. The moment something is labeled forbidden or exclusive, it gains weight in our imagination, whether it's a medieval alchemist's formula or a modern celebrity's private life. The real power of secret societies wasn't in their hidden knowledge, but in their ability to make us believe there was always more to find. And that's a spell even time hasn't broken. Hollywood would have us believe medieval secret societies were dens of hooded figures chanting in Latin over ancient maps. But the truth is far less cinematic and far more fascinating. Take the Knights Templar, for instance. Blockbuster films depict them as treasure-hoarding zealots guarding the Holy Grail, when in reality, their day-to-day operations revolved around logistics. Their true power wasn't in arcane rituals, but in meticulous record-keeping, inventories of grain stores, loan ledgers, even shipping manifests for transporting wool between England and Flanders. The Vatican's own archives reveal Templar documents reading more like corporate memos than mystical scrolls, with disputes over interest rates and property boundaries far outnumbering mentions of relics. The myth of the all-powerful Illuminati similarly crumbles under scrutiny. Modern conspiracy theorists imagine a centuries-old puppet master pulling global strings, but the historical Bavarian Illuminati existed for barely a decade before being suppressed. Their real legacy, not world domination, but innovative debate formats that influenced modern think tanks. Their secret meetings often involved reading Enlightenment philosophy aloud, hardly the stuff of shadowy cabals. Even their famed Iand pyramid symbol, now stamped on dollar bills, was borrowed from Renaissance alchemy books, where it represented God's omniscience, not clandestine control. Primary sources offer the clearest window into what these groups actually valued. When researchers deciphered the manuscript, a bizarre 15th century codex once attributed to secret societies, they found not apocalyptic prophecies, but herbal remedies and astrological charts. The Cathars, so-called heretical texts, preserved in rare fragments, contain less devil worship than critiques of church corruption and surprisingly progressive views on gender equality. Even the infamous own chronicles describe political assassinations as brutal but pragmatic acts, not the theatrical performances later Crusader accounts would claim. The greatest distortion lies in how we portray their motivations. Secret societies weren't monolithic villains or heroes. They were human. A Templar knight might genuinely believe he was serving God while also negotiating trade deals. A Rosicrucian could passionately pursue both scientific discovery and mystical enlightenment. This complexity gets flattened in pop culture into simplistic tropes, erasing the very tensions that made these groups historically significant. Peeling back these layers doesn't diminish their intrigue, it deepens it. There's more drama in the real Templars' bankruptcy trial than any Grail quest, more suspense in the Cathars' coded sermons than any fictional heresy. By trading myths for parchment evidence, we don't lose the mystery, we reclaim the humanity behind it. And that's a truth far more compelling than any conspiracy. The world of medieval espionage thrived in the spaces between candlelit corridors and bustling market squares, where a whispered word could topple a kingdom as surely as any army. Secret societies didn't just rely on mysticism and rituals. They built intricate networks of spies who mastered the art of invisibility in plain sight. Take whose operatives might spend years posing as merchants or servants, patiently embedding themselves in a target's household before striking with chilling precision. But their deadliest weapon wasn't the dagger, it was information. A well-placed rumor about a nobleman's treasonous correspondence could destabilize a court faster than any battle, proving that in the shadows, knowledge was more lethal than steel. What set these medieval spies apart was their ingenuity with codes and concealment. Alchemists perfected invisible inks made from lemon juice or milk, revealing their messages only when heated over a flame. Minstrels traveling between castles carried lyrics laced with encrypted instructions, their melodies masking treasonous plots. Even the humble embroidery on a noblewoman's sleeve could relay troop movements through prearranged patterns, a practice so effective that of Ark's allies allegedly used it to coordinate her campaigns. The Templars took it further, developing a cipher system so advanced that fragments of their coded ledgers still baffle cryptographers today. These weren't just tricks. They were survival tools in an era where intercepted intelligence meant torture and execution. Yet the most fascinating spies weren't the professionals, but the unwilling conscripts. Monks copying manuscripts in scriptoria were sometimes coerced into reporting secrets gleaned from confessors or visiting dignitaries. Innkeepers along pilgrimage routes became accidental intelligence hubs, their taverns teeming with gossip about troop movements or noble rivalries. Even children, considered beneath suspicion, were employed as couriers, their innocent hands carrying folded parchment hidden in loaves of bread. This democratization of espionage reveals a brutal truth. In the medieval world, anyone could become a weapon if you knew how to wield them. The legacy of these tactics echoes in modern intelligence agencies. The CIA's dead drop techniques mirror the Templars' habit of burying messages under specific church floor tiles. MI6's disguise manuals owe a debt to this mastery of blending into foreign courts. And the very concept of need-to-know compartmentalization, that traces back to guilds where apprentices learned only fragments of their craft, ensuring no single member could betray the whole. The medieval spies who perfected these arts would likely smirk at our high-tech surveillance, because they proved centuries ago that the human element, trust, deception, and the hunger for secrets is the one variable no technology can fully control. The Templars didn't just carry swords, they carried ledgers. While knights clashed on battlefields, these warrior monks were quietly revolutionizing finance in ways that would make modern bankers nod in recognition. Picture a pilgrim setting out for Jerusalem in the 12th century. The roads teemed with bandits, and carrying a purse of gold was an invitation for disaster. Enter the Templars with a solution so simple it was brilliant. Deposit your wealth at a Templar in Paris, receive a coded letter of credit, and redeem it at their fortress in Acre. No gold changed hands en route. The real currency was trust in their sprawling network of commanderies stretching from London to the Levant. This wasn't just a convenience. It was the birth of modern banking, proving that control over money could wield as much power as any army. But the Templars' financial genius went far beyond travelers' checks. They became the medieval equivalent of a multinational corporation, managing assets for kings and popes alike. Their vaults under the Temple Mount in Paris were so secure that the French crown used them as a royal treasury. They issued loans, collected taxes, and even pioneered early forms of venture capital, funding everything from castle construction to maritime trade. At their peak, their economic web stretched so wide that they effectively functioned as Europe's first international credit system. A merchant in Genoa could settle debts with a wool trader in Flanders through Templar intermediaries, bypassing the need to transport bulky coinage across treacherous routes. What made their system truly revolutionary was its reliance on secrecy. Templar transactions were encrypted with complex ciphers, their account books written in codes that blended Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. A single symbol next to a nobleman's name might indicate everything from his creditworthiness to political alliances, a medieval credit score wrapped in layers of discretion. This opacity bred both trust and suspicion. Kings borrowed heavily from the order, knowing their financial embarrassments would remain hidden, but resentment simmered beneath the surface. When Philip IV of France orchestrated the Templars' downfall in 1307, his motivations weren't purely religious, they were financial. Destroying the order erased his massive debts and handed him their vast liquidity in one stroke. Yet the Templars' legacy outlived their persecution. Their banking innovations laid the groundwork for Renaissance-era Medici practices and even modern central banking. The concept of safe deposit vaults, Templar invention, the idea of an international financial network, they proved it possible centuries before Swift codes. Even their downfall serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing too much economic power with political ambition. Their story reminds us that money, when wielded with precision and secrecy, can be the ultimate silent partner in history's grand dramas, a lesson as relevant in boardrooms today as it was in their candlelit counting houses. Beneath the flickering candlelight of medieval scriptoria, scribes penned texts that would become the lifeblood of secret societies, manuscripts so deliberately veiled in symbolism that they functioned as both invitation and armor. A Rosicrucian manifesto left casually on a scholar's desk might appear as mystical nonsense to prying eyes, but to an initiate, its allegories crackled with revolutionary ideas about science and spirituality. This wasn't just obscurity for its own sake, it was survival. When the church could burn you for heresy, encoding your beliefs in layers of alchemical metaphors and astrological diagrams wasn't artistic flair. It was a matter of life and death. Take the infamous wedding of Christian, published in 1617. On the surface, it reads like a surreal fairy tale. A knight attends a royal wedding where guests undergo bizarre trials involving lions, towers, and celestial visions. But to those versed in Rosicrucian thought, every detail carried weight. The lions symbolized antimony, a metal crucial to alchemical processes. The tower represented the stages of spiritual purification. Even the wedding itself was code for the ultimate alchemical goal, the union of opposites, the creation of something new from apparent contradictions. These texts weren't meant to be read, they were meant to be deciphered, a literary initiation rite that separated the curious from the committed. The logistics of spreading these ideas were as ingenious as their content. Manuscripts often traveled in fragments, their full meaning only emerging when combined with oral teachings. A monk might copy an innocuous-looking herbal compendium, unaware that its plant illustrations hid a Cathar treatise on dualism when read in a specific order. Booksellers in university towns like Bologna or Paris became clandestine distributors, recognizing certain customers by the questions they asked rather than explicit requests. Some volumes even employed Grill ciphers metal overlays with cut-out spaces that revealed hidden sentences when placed over seemingly random text. But the most subversive texts often wore the disguise of orthodoxy. Ostensibly a record of divine visions, wove in cosmological ideas that bordered on the heretical, protected by her reputation as a saintly abbess. Dante's Divine Comedy, while celebrated as a Christian epic, smuggled in Templar symbolism and esoteric numerology that hinted at alternative spiritual hierarchies. These works thrived because they spoke to multiple audiences simultaneously. The faithful saw piety, the initiated saw rebellion, and the authorities saw nothing alarming enough to warrant suppression. The legacy of this literary shadow play endures in ways we rarely notice. Modern fantasy novels still borrow medieval esoteric tropes, from Dan Brown's symbology-laden thrillers to the alchemical themes in Harry Potter. The very concept of an Easter egg, hidden messages waiting to be uncovered, echoes the medieval scribe's art. What began as a defense mechanism became a cultural language, proving that ideas wrapped in mystery don't just survive persecution, they transcend it, whispering across centuries to those willing to lean closer and listen. Climb the spiral staircase of any Gothic cathedral, and you're not just ascending toward light, you're walking through a three-dimensional cipher. The soaring arches and stained glass weren't merely architectural triumphs. They were the medieval equivalent of an encrypted hard drive, storing secrets in plain sight. Take Chapel in Scotland, often linked to Templar legends. Between its ornate carvings of maize plants, a crop unknown in Europe when it was built, and the precise alignment of its pillars to mirror Solomon's temple, every stone seems to whisper of knowledge that couldn't be written in ink. But this wasn't just about hiding treasures. It was about encoding entire worldviews into structures that would outlast parchment and persecution. The master builders knew something modern architects often forget. Geometry speaks louder than words. Chartres Cathedral's labyrinth floor pattern, once walked by pilgrims on their knees, isn't just a spiritual exercise. It mirrors the Kabbalistic tree of life when viewed from above. The famous rose windows found in Gothic churches do more than dazzle with colored light. Their petal formations and measured proportions encode hermetic principles of harmony and cosmic order. Even the cathedral's layout often followed sacred ratios, with the nave's length precisely 5 times the width of the transept, a silent nod to the Pythagorean pentagram revered by secret mathematical societies. These weren't artistic choices. They were declarations of forbidden knowledge disguised as devotion. Beneath the visible grandeur lay even more tantalizing secrets. Templar chapels frequently contained double-walled constructions with hollow cavities, not for structural support, but as clandestine storage. In Portugal, a chapel's acoustics were deliberately engineered so whispers at one altar could be heard clearly at another 30 feet away, creating an early form of secure communication. Some cathedrals hid entire libraries behind movable altarpieces, like the legendary cache rumored beneath rents, where a priest's late 19th century renovations revealed crypts filled with cryptic symbols. The stonemasons who built these spaces left their own marks, masons' marks, tiny sigils carved into cornerstones that identified which guild brother worked on each section, while also conveying hidden messages about the building's true purpose. What's most remarkable isn't the ingenuity of these concealments, but their dual nature. A Templar round church like London's Temple Church served openly as a place of worship, while its very design, modeled after Jerusalem's holy, declared the order's ambitions to reclaim the Holy Land. The same flying buttresses that allowed for unprecedented height in Gothic cathedrals also created shadowed niches perfect for discreet meetings. Even the gargoyles served multiple purposes, diverting rainwater while warding off both evil spirits and prying eyes with their grotesque vigilance. The real lesson of these stone puzzles isn't about finding hidden treasure. It's understanding how medieval societies preserved ideas too dangerous for books. When authorities burned heretical texts, they couldn't torch architecture. The knowledge lived on in the angle of a vaulted ceiling, the alignment of a chapel to specific stars, or the numerical patterns in floor tiles waiting centuries for someone to notice. These buildings were the original blockchain, decentralized, tamper-proof repositories where truth wasn't written, but built. And that's why, even today, running your fingers along their weathered stones feels less like touching history and more like brushing against the edges of a secret still breathing beneath the surface. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the world was shifting beneath the feet of medieval secret societies. The same shadows that once sheltered them now threatened to smother their relevance. Political centralization was sweeping Europe. Kings no longer tolerated autonomous power structures like the Templars, financial empire, or the independent strongholds. Monarchs like France's Louis XI and England's Henry VII consolidated authority, leaving little room for groups that operated beyond royal oversight. Even the Church, long a patron and persecutor of clandestine orders, found itself fractured by the Reformation, too preoccupied with survival to indulge in esoteric power plays. The medieval dance between secrecy and authority was ending, and those who couldn't adapt found themselves on the wrong side of history. Consider the fate of the Templars' successors. Who inherited much of their wealth and infrastructure, survived by transforming into a naval force defending Christian shipping lanes, a service too valuable for kings to dismantle. Meanwhile, the Teutonic Knights pivoted from crusading to territorial rule in Prussia, trading their mystic aura for the mundane work of tax collection and border governance. These weren't betrayals of principle, they were pragmatic reinventions. Societies that clung too tightly to medieval models, like the remaining Cathar holdouts in the Pyrenees, were systematically eradicated by the Inquisition's newly streamlined bureaucracy. The message was clear. The age of independent actors wielding unchecked influence through secrecy was over. Yet some societies didn't so much disappear as dissolve into the cultural groundwater. Alchemists, once hunted as heretics, found new patronage under Renaissance princes who valued their proto-scientific experiments. Their coded manuscripts became textbooks for early chemists. Their symbols evolved into the language of the scientific revolution. The Rosicrucian manifestos, though likely literary hoaxes, inspired real intellectual networks that birthed the Enlightenment's first salons. Even the guilds' trade secrets eventually fueled the Industrial Revolution, as former artisans became factory foremen teaching their techniques to a new working class. What looked like decline was often metamorphosis, the medieval obsession with hidden knowledge giving way to an era where ideas demanded sunlight to grow. The true end came not with persecution, but with irrelevance. As printing presses democratized learning, the painstaking oral traditions of groups like the Druids became obsolete. When nation-states developed professional spy networks, this assassination for hire model looked amateurish. Most damning of all, the Reformation proved that ideological revolutions no longer needed secret cells. They could unfold in public debates and printed pamphlets. The medieval world's secret societies had thrived on information asymmetry. The Renaissance's explosion of literacy and communication eroded their very foundation. But here's the twist. Their disappearance was never total. The Freemasons would later resurrect Templar iconography for entirely new purposes. Rosicrucian ideas resurfaced in the Royal Society's scientific pursuits. The alchemists' quest for transformation found new life in the Enlightenment's faith in human progress. The societies died, but their DNA endured, proof that even the most secretive traditions leave fingerprints on history's doorknobs, waiting for the next era to turn them. The whispers of medieval secret societies might seem like relics of a distant past, but their echoes shape our modern world in ways we rarely pause to recognize. Consider how today's debates over digital privacy mirror the Templars' struggle to balance discretion with accountability. Their encrypted banking system was the medieval equivalent of end-to-end messaging, valuable for protecting pilgrims, but terrifying to kings who couldn't monitor the flow of money. Fast forward to our era, where tech giants and governments clash over encryption protocols, and you'll spot the same tension. How much secrecy is necessary for safety, and when does it become a threat to collective security? The past isn't repeating itself, it's holding up a mirror. Power structures today still rely on the same, perfected by medieval guilds and clandestine orders. Corporate boardrooms operate with layers of confidentiality agreements that would make a Rosicrucian nod in recognition. Modern lobbying networks function much like the back-channel negotiations of Templar bankers, where influence is traded in hushed conversations rather than public decrees. Even the concept of need-to-know, compartmentalization, standard in intelligence agencies, traces straight back to guild masters who taught apprentices only fragments of their craft to protect trade secrets. The players have changed, but the game remains startlingly familiar. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in how these societies weaponized trust. They didn't just assassinate targets, they cultivated myths about their invincibility to paralyze enemies with dread. Today, social media algorithms and viral misinformation exploit similar psychological vulnerabilities, proving that controlling perception is still the ultimate power move. The Cathars' downfall demonstrates another timeless truth. When institutions feel threatened by alternative belief systems, they don't just debate, they destroy. Modern cancel culture and smear campaigns follow the same ruthless playbook, just with keyboards instead of torches. Yet these histories also offer unexpected hope. The Beguines' quiet rebellion, using piety as a shield for independence, finds its parallel in modern activists who leverage legal loopholes to challenge unjust systems. Alchemists persecuted for heretical experiments paved the way for peer-reviewed science, showing how marginalized ideas can become mainstream truths. Even the Templars' financial innovations, born from necessity, evolved into systems that now underpin global economies. Their stories remind us that today's underground movements might seed tomorrow's revolutions. What medieval secret societies understood, and what we're still grappling with, is that transparency and secrecy aren't opposites, but dance partners in an endless negotiation. Every encrypted chat, every leak, every corporate deal continues their centuries-old conversation about who gets to control knowledge and why. The shadows they once inhabited haven't vanished. They've simply digitized, proving that as long as power exists, so too will the need to sometimes operate beyond its gaze. Their legacy isn't just in the secrets they kept, but in the uncomfortable questions they force us to ask about our own complicity in the systems that shape our lives. The rise and fall of medieval secret societies reveal a paradox as old as civilization itself. Power thrives in shadows, but shadows breed fear. The Templars discovered this too late, their financial empire collapsing not from bankruptcy, but from the suspicion their secrecy invited. The Rosicrucians, whether real or myth, proved ideas wrapped in mystery outlive armies, their symbols now plastered across pop culture, while their original manifestos gather dust. Even the masters of psychological warfare learned that terror alone couldn't sustain influence when the Mongols arrived with no interest in their games. These weren't just medieval dramas. They were test cases for how knowledge, when hoarded or shared, alters the course of history. What makes their stories resonate isn't the cloak and dagger theatrics, but the uncomfortable questions they force us to confront. When guilds controlled trade secrets to protect livelihoods, were they preserving quality or stifling progress? When the Church persecuted Cathars for their dualist beliefs, was it defending doctrine or eliminating competition? The answers depend on where you stand, then and now. Modern tech giants guard algorithms like alchemists' formulas, while governments classify documents using the same logic as Templar scribes. Some knowledge is too dangerous to circulate. The players have changed, but the tensions remain eerily familiar. Yet the most enduring lesson isn't about secrecy's dangers. It's about its inevitability. Medieval societies lacked our transparency ideals, but they understood something we often forget. No system functions without back channels. The Magna was brokered in private before being sealed publicly. Renaissance bankers kept dual ledgers just as Templars had. Today's and leakers are the modern equivalents of those medieval scribes who forbidden texts, forcing us to grapple with the same dilemma. When is concealment corruption, and when is it protection? The legacy of these groups lives on in our collective imagination because they represent the ultimate human fantasy, to know what others don't. From Dan Brown novels to cryptocurrency forums, we've inherited their hunger for hidden truths. But history suggests the real power rarely lies with the puppet masters we envision. The Templars didn't fall because they were too powerful. They fell because they underestimated how fragile trust becomes when wrapped in too much mystery. The Rosicrucians influenced science not through cabals, but because their ideas were good, not just secret. As you scroll through news feeds or walk past corporate headquarters, remember, the shadows today aren't filled with hooded figures chanting Latin. They're boardrooms discussing data privacy, forums debating disinformation, even your own phone's encryption protocols. The medieval world asked who controlled the relics. Ours asks who controls the algorithms. The tools have changed, but the game hasn't. So the next time you hear a conspiracy theory or click, except on a terms of service agreement, ask yourself, what would a Templar do? And more importantly, who's watching you ask? Drop your theories in the comments and let's keep unraveling history